Hello, I'm Elise. Welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing so good today. Today, I am going to be going over some quarterly stats. So I did a midpoint year check-in about some of my reading goals, and I'm here to do that again now that the next quarter has been completed. So I'll be talking about some of my reading goals as far as like July, August, and September have gone, and then checking in on some of the yearly goals and how those have been going thus far. So let's go ahead and get into it. Firstly, I want to talk about my amount of books I've read so far this year, which I should have had this more planned. I think it's 85. Okay, yes. So I have read 85 books so far this year. My goal for the year was 30, so we're way beyond that, and I talked about why my goal was so low in my previous video. But right now, I think the new goal is kind of like 100, so which we should be able to easily reach. I don't try to set a goal that's like too far out of reach. I don't want to feel pressury, but I do like having some type of goal to kind of try and get to. So 85 is what I've read so far. Feeling good about that. The other goal that I've been keeping track of for the first time this year is sort of like books in, books out. But of course I have my own parameters for this. So I am tracking the number of books that I buy this year, and then the number of books off my physical TBR that I have read. That is all. So the things that is not including is any books that I'm gifted. I do not count in my books in. I want them to be solely gifts and enjoy them, and I don't want to be thinking about that pushing my number up. So it's just the books that I buy, and really it's because I'm trying to target, like, am I buying more books than I can read in a given year or not? And then the books out is just the physical TBR that I have read. So this doesn't count any DNFs, any unhauls. So that is kind of balancing out the gifts for me. I have unhauled way more books than I have been given this year. So if I kept track of that, I would be in the positive, but I'm not keeping track of that. I'm just keeping track of how many I read to completion in a given year. So those are the rules. Who knows why I have them, but those are the rules that I feel good about this time. So this I am not doing good in. I knew I was not doing good in. In September, you will see I have a huge book haul in a couple of weeks. That will put me even further behind. So, c'est la vie. What are you gonna do? I love buying books. So far for this year, my books in, so books that I've bought, is 86. Yes, 86. And my physical books read is only 55. Which is not great. Now, the reason why it's lower, because obviously I just said I've read 85 books. So if I had just been reading the books that were coming in, I would just be one behind. But I do read from the library. So about a third of the books that I read in a given year are from the library. For better or worse, I love using my library, but it's not helping me with my goal on this, but I'm okay with it. So I'm behind. I don't realistically think at this point I'm going to catch up. Who knows? We'll check back in at the end of the year. But like I said, I have another huge book haul coming because I was traveling a ton in September. And whenever I travel to a new city, I go to a bookstore, and I went to a bunch of new cities and therefore a bunch of new bookstores. So look forward to seeing that. Other than that, I have a translated book goal that I have for myself, and that's basically just to read at least one book in translation every month. Most months I read much more than that, but I need to at least read one in every month. So in my previous review, or kind of recap on my goals, I went over the books that I had counted for each month thus far throughout the year. I'm not going to do that again here. I am just going to run through really quick all of the books in translation that I read in these 3 months. So July, August, and September. I'm not going to talk about the synopsis. I'm not going to talk about anything. I'm just going to show you the book and the cover, and that's all. So in July, I read 4 books in translation. I read Cursed Bunny by Bora Chung, translated by Anton Her, published by Hanford Starr. And then I also read 3 volumes in the Spy Family series. I read 5, 6, and 7. These are published by Shonen Jump, and they are by Tetsuya Endo. The translator is really, really hard to find, and I have it in one of my previous videos, but I don't have it on me now, but I will link it down below. In August, I read 5. I think 2 of them were library books. They were Blood Feast, and what was the other one? Oh, and An Elderly Lady Must Not Be Crossed. So I'll put those images up here. The 3 physical ones that I read were Celestial Bodies by Joka Alarathi, and that is published by Catapult. I read Portrait of an Unknown Lady by Maria Gainza. That is also published by Catapult. And I read Boulder by Eva Baltazar, translated by Julia Sanchez, and this is by And Other Stories. Those are the ones I read in August. And then in September, I only read 1, which is rare for me, but I only read 1, and that is We Had to Remove This Post by Hannah Bervoets, translated from the Danish by Emma Rolt, and loved that, 5 stars. So those are all of the books in translation that I read over the past 3 months. And the last thing that I want to get into today is something I alluded to in my last recap goals video. And there have been a couple of TBR challenges that I've been doing throughout the year just to read more off of my physical TBR. One of them is just a straight up number, and I completed that long ago. But the other one is a specific reading challenge that has prompts on Storygraph. If you're interested on kind of checking out this reading challenge on Storygraph after I've talked about it here, please go find it there. I will put the title of it so you know, and I'll be going over the prompts and what I chose to fulfill all of them. So we will go ahead and go over that now. So this is, like I said, a TBR challenge. This challenge is called Cut Down Your TBR 2022. This is hosted by Olivia Marianne. This has 12 prompts. I'll go over them and let you know what I read for each one. So the first prompt is the oldest book on your TBR. And I had a vlog I'll link to a couple months ago maybe, reading some of the oldest books on my TBR. And the one that I chose for this prompt is Rabbit Cake by Amy Arnett. And this is published by Tin House Books. This was a story about grief, a young girl whose mother passes away. She has to deal with the grief of that, and you see how her whole family deals with that loss. There's lots to do with animals in this. Like the title would suggest, there are rabbits, there's a parrot, there's a dog, lots of stuff going on here. It is very lighthearted, even though it's talking about hard themes. And I gave that 3 stars. So that is Rabbit Cake. And this has been on my TBR for over 5 years. So that is that one. The next one is to read a sequel to a book that you've read more than a year ago. And the one that I chose for this is Take a Hint, Danny Brown. And this is by Talia Hibbert, published by Piatkus. I think that's how you say it. So I read, Get a Life, Chloe Brown, several years ago when it first came out, I believe. And I have not continued on in the series. So at the beginning of this year, I read this one. This is my favorite in the series. I have since read the 3rd one as well, and this is by far my favorite. I loved this one. So enjoyed it. It's a romance. It follows Danny Brown, who is one of the sisters in the Brown sister siblings. And this is kind of her novel. She works very hard. She's a professor, and she has a romance with a security guard in her building. So love this one. Great steam, great representation. So good. All right, next one that I read for this challenge is a classic. Oh, and I'm realizing I haven't grabbed that one, so let me grab it off the shelf really quick. Okay, I'm back. So the reason why this one was on the shelf is this is actually my husband's book. Every year he picks a book for me to read, and I read it without question. This year, that was a mistake because he had me read 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And this is translated from the Spanish by Gregory Rabasa and published by Harper Perennial. So I did not like this, as I've already alluded to. This is my husband's favorite novel, and that's why he had me read it. He rarely reads fiction. He pretty much only reads nonfiction. This is a well-known classic. I'm sure you know what it's about, but it's a very cyclical novel about, you know, generations of a family that covers about 100 years, all of the cycles and patterns that they can't get out of. And it's very repetitive. It's fantastical. It's got magical realism. It's just so fucking bizarre. Like, it's so bizarre. And if this had been cut down 200 pages, I think it could have been brilliant, but I just did not need the around and around and around and around and the incest and the fighting and the everything. Like, I did not need that for so long. Didn't work for me, but you know, don't trust my opinion. There's so many people that love this, but this was the classic that I read for this year. So did that. Next book is a book by an author that you love. And for this, I need to reach all the way over here. I have them stacked all around me. For this, I read the 4th volume of Heartstopper by Alice Oseman, and this is published by Graphics in the US. This was lovely. It was the first book I read this year because I wanted to start out on a good note, and it was 5 stars. The US editions are like this monochrome color palette. I know the UK editions are just black and white, but yeah, very much love this. A little love story between 2 boys. Very uplifting, even though it covers heavy themes and topics. So love it. This was the author that I loved that I read from. Next prompt is a book in your most read genre. And for that, so in Storygraph, it sort of shows you moods that you read from the most. When I looked at the moods I read from the most, which are emotional and reflective, which is like most books, so I think that is the moods that most people read from the most, I got this one, and this is Thirst by Amelie Nothomb, and this is translated from the French by Alison Anderson. This was fantastic. This is still one of my favorite books of the year, and I read it in the very beginning of the year. This is a satirical retelling of the 48 hours before Christ is crucified from his perspective. It's very funny, like so funny. I rarely laugh out loud when I'm reading, and I did laugh out loud during this book. And basically, yeah, he's like pointing out all the inconsistencies that are happening around him and kind of all the ridiculousness of the people who are persecuting him. And it's just so funny. I think if you like kind of critical commentary on religion and satire together, this could be a huge win for you, and I very much enjoyed it. So next prompt is a daunting book, and that's a book that is over 500 pages, and this is the one that I was waiting to complete and have now completed as of September. I've read other books that are over 500 pages this year, but this was the one I had selected for this challenge, and so I was waiting to complete it, and that is Crossroads by Jonathan Franzen, and this is published by FSG. This kind of similarly interesting that it comes after this, because this is also has a lot of religious commentary. It follows the Hildebrandt family, and it follows all of their perspectives, so you get all of the different POVs. The father is a pastor, and they grow up in a very like evangelical Christian community and household, and you get to see the implications of faith that has on each of them individually and very differently, how they react to it. Very much enjoyed this. It has lots of like great fully fledged characters. 2 POVs did stand out to me as kind of the star POVs, and the other ones fell a little bit flat for me, but overall very much enjoyed it. Glad I read it, and I will be continuing on in this trilogy. So that is that one. The next prompt is a book that's been adapted into a film or TV series. And for this one, I chose Leave the World Behind by Rumaan Alam, and this is published by Echo. And this is a dystopian novel, but it's very quiet. If you're looking for plot that's not what you would come here for. This follows a family who is on vacation and staying in like an Airbnb, and something happens in the city that they don't quite know about, and kind of they lose power. There's a strange sound, but they can see the power getting lost in the city, but they still have some power at the house. So then this couple shows up at the house and says like, hey, we need to stay with you. We're the owners of this house. Something has happened in the city and we need to stay with you. You kind of go from there. It's very confusing. You're not sure what's happening a lot of the time. You're not sure who you can trust. It was ultimately very, very good. I enjoyed this a lot. And this is getting made into a movie that has Mahershala Ali and Julia Roberts. So, whoa, like star-studded cast. Can't wait to watch it. So that is this one. Next prompt, we're getting close to the end. This is prompt number 8 of 12. And this is a translated work. Obviously, we've already talked about that. I've read lots of translated works throughout this year, but the one that I decided to choose for this one apparently, and I think it's because I read it in January, is The Whole by Hiroka Oyamada. And this is translated from the Japanese by David Boyd and published by New Directions. This is kind of magical, realist, bizarre take on a workplace novel, which is what Oyamada does. And this one follows a woman who leaves her job in the city because her husband has gotten a better job out in the country where his family is from. And so they move out there, and because he's making enough money, she no longer has to work. So she becomes a housewife, and her days are so monotonous that she starts losing track of reality, and bizarre things start happening to her. This was ultimately good. I like the commentary on what it means to be a working person in the 21st century. This has a lot of commentary on workplace culture when you're Japanese and what that means for you, especially as a woman. And I thought it was overall really good. It is dry, and I think the pacing could use some work. I think I gave this 3 stars, but don't regret reading it by any means. So that is The Whole. Next one is a book by a BIPOC author. Again, there's so many that could have been chosen for this, but I think one of the first ones I read throughout the year that I hadn't already used for another prompt is Milk Blood Heat. This is by Dontiel W. Moniz. And this is a short story collection that was getting a lot of buzz. I ultimately enjoyed this. I will say I read the first story and then took a long break from this book. And that is because the first story messed with my mind. This has tons of trigger warnings in it, and I was not prepared for the first story going in. I do think the first story is the most intense, but then I needed to take a break because I was like, that fucked me up. Some of the stories I really enjoyed. There were about like 5 stories that I just absolutely loved. Other ones fell a little bit flat for me. The first story is sort of about a toxic relationship between 2 young girls. There's one about a romantic relationship between 2 people who they're not quite sure if they're going to stay together or not. There's one about a woman who is about to get married, is engaged, and doesn't want to have kids, and then finds out she's pregnant. Those are some of the ones that stand out to me. This really is all about relationships. A lot of times, struggling relationships or toxic relationships, and how a person might come to be in that type of relationship and maybe even be the perpetrator of that type of relationship. So very intriguing in that sense. Some stories better than other, but would still recommend reading this. And this has been getting lots of praise from other people who liked it more than I did. So I would still recommend that one. Next prompt is a book set in your home country. For this, I tried to go more specific and picked a book that was set in my state. So I live in Seattle, Washington. So I read It Happened One Summer, which takes place in Washington in a fictional town kind of on the seaside that's supposed to be similar to like a Port Townsend. This was very, very cute. It's supposed to be a kind of Schitt's Creek inspired romance. Piper, the main character, being modeled off of Alexis. Very cute. I very much enjoyed it. The atmosphere was perfect. It reminded me of towns up here, like port towns up here. So very much enjoyed that and would highly recommend if you like romance and or Schitt's Creek. Next prompt is a book set in a country your family is from, and for this I chose A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson, and this is published by Nyx Publishing. I should say this one is published by Avon and this one is published by Grove. So this book is a retelling of Dracula's Brides, and it's from the perspective of one of the brides, and I very much enjoyed this. So I picked this for this prompt because a portion of this book takes place in Spain and my mother's Spanish, so it worked for that prompt for that reason. And this was really good. This is queer. So a great part of this retelling is that not all of Dracula's brides are women. So he takes a husband as well at one point. So I enjoyed that aspect of it. This is really talking about the abusive relationship that they are in with Dracula, and that you imagine someone might be in when someone creates you, maybe against your own will, and has that type of power over you. So this was really good. I highly recommend it. It was like self-published, I think, but now has been picked up by a publisher and is getting reprinted in kind of like some nicer editions. I highly recommend this one. Very much enjoyed it. Great for Halloween time if you're looking for something. And then the last prompt number 12, is a book by a new to you author. Again, I could have chosen a ton for this, but I picked one that I read very early on in January, and that is The Wolf Den by Elodie Harper. And this is a historical fiction novel, the first part in a trilogy that I will be continuing on in. And I'm very excited. I loved this book. This follows Amara, who gets sold to a brothel, and it's about her time working in the brothel, which is called the Wolf Den. And there is a whole cast of women who are working there. And while Amara is the main character, it very much follows the other women as well. And yeah, experiencing the like tragedy and the horror that goes on there. But also Amara is very intelligent. She got sold into slavery because her father passed away, and then her and her mother basically became destitute, and then she was sold. She comes from more of like an upper middle class upbringing, and she is trying to find a way to escape living in the brothel. The person that owns the brothel is like a horrible, violent man, and this takes place in Pompeii, which the atmosphere is amazing. You get all the Pompeii vibes, but a lovely thing is it's nothing to do with the volcano. So that is nice, because every time you read something about Pompeii, it's always about the volcano erupting. And while the volcano is there, it is not erupting. So that is The Wolf Den. Highly recommend. We'll be continuing. And that is the TBR challenge that I have now completed. So one challenge I'm doing really good at, so I'm proud of myself for that. We'll see how the rest of the year goes. A nice thing about doing this was a lot of the books that I've done for this challenge I read in the first half of the year, which was before I was on BookTube. So I got to talk about a lot of books that I haven't talked about before and probably wouldn't have had a chance to talk about. So I'm glad I got to do that. So with that, that is the end of my goals check-in for this quarter. And I will check back in with you at the end of the year to see how it all ends up. Bye.